Whether you're new to pool and practicing the basics, or a more experienced player performing drills to improve your shot making and positional play, the Drill Partner is perfect.
What is up, Mike? You dodged this bullet long. You dodged
Seen more of you in the past week than I have in the past 3 months.
You know, I would take offense to that, but that's pretty spot on. It's pretty accurate, actually. So, if the shoe fits, Cinderella, you got to wear it.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, it's true, 'cause, but you got to get back on the saddle sometimes, and
yeah,
I've been enjoying doing more shows, if I'm being honest with you, and it's been pretty. Like I've told you before, I usually judge the show off of one thing, and it's like if the time goes by fast, and I feel like it's pretty decent. They've been going by pretty good, so
yeah, good.
I'm excited for this one though, Mike. This has been a long time coming. This show in particular, we've been kind of talking about this over the last. It's crazy to think about now, going back to the Rio, which was like what 3 months ago now.
Even before that, I mean, it was. Yeah, I mean, it's almost to the point where we've talked about this WPA, Matchroom thing so long that now that it finally come to some kind of resolution, it's almost like people have stopped talking about it. It's like, okay, and let's move on. I'm like, wait a second.
Yeah.
This was kind of a big deal.
Well, it's been it's been beating a dead horse for sure, and it's been an exhausting process, and it's kind of just been recycling the same things. We're waiting on this to come out. We've been hearing that to come out. You know what I mean? Waiting for an
I
official
think they kind of
announcement.
bored everybody into a coma with the back and forth. But what people shouldn't lose track of is what would have happened if this one had fallen through too, right?
Armageddon.
Well, not Armageddon, but I think that it was. If you remember last year, and obviously, guys, what we're talking about is WPA Matchroom coming to some kind of agreement on being able to all players being able to play in Matchroom and WPA events without stuff hanging over their head. Matchroom be able to go on with their business of running the tournaments the way they want to, without interference from the WPA, but also having the approval of players to play.
Right.
So. This has been going on since you and I were there, December of 22, right? In Las Vegas, when Barry Hearn kind of pulled us aside and said, let's talk, and said, we're not sanctioning anything with WPA anymore. They don't do anything for us. We don't need them. We want to run the business our own way. And we don't want to have to jump through hoops. So, that was the start of it. And then it became this big, who's got more power, who's going to crumble first, the WPA needs to go away, Matchroom forever, all this kind of stuff. But reality started setting in a little bit later that there's a fair amount at stake in this. It wasn't like every player was going to go to one side or the other.
No, and it shifted a few times.
It shifted a few times. And WPA, we rode the WPA pretty hard in the early days of this, process, right?
We?
You.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's not. It's that whole situation was. It was exhausting because of just the amount of things that I've been hearing about over the last 10 plus years, and then it starts to become more of like it becomes more personal when you start hearing about it from specific players. You know what I mean? Like this is I'm having to deal with this. I'm not getting this. I haven't gotten paid for that, and then it just starts to become then it became a bit of a witch hunt, which wasn't the proudest of moments for sure on the show, but it's crazy to think that it's been a couple of years now. I think like I'm number one, the first reaction is, I'm glad that they got it figured out, but it was looking a little dodgy for a long, long time, Mike. You know what I mean? And so,
it's just one of those things where, at the time, WPA, I think the people from WPA will admit that at the time they did not handle their end of what was going to happen or what's in the future well, from a
No.
PR standpoint, from a transparency standpoint, from anything. And so they immediately came out looking like the bad guy. But I will give them credit over the long haul in terms of always, you and I have talked to WPA President Ishad Singh a million times. And, they always said the door is open to talk if they want to talk. And we always heard from the Matchroom side that, we're busy, we're moving ahead with stuff. We're really not interested in talking. This is the way it's going to play out. We're just doing what we want to do. And that it became easy for them not to talk because nothing had really happened yet. Everything changed in Hanoi last October, right? That's when the rubber hit the road, and people were banned, and people didn't show up to the event because they were worried about getting banned. And then it became real. It became real between the players and having to pick one side or the other. And then, you go to the International Open, which had gotten a free pass from the WPA on everybody playing. And the players who were there, it was a really weird vibe.
Nobody knew. There was a lot of, is it sanctioned? Is it not sanctioned? Am I banned? Am I not banned?
The players who went there, you could tell that there were two camps. And there was
well, because of everything that happened prior to Hanoi, it started with the U.S. Open, and everyone kind of joins together and united, and then all these social media posts. Which, I mean, listen, we talked about this before. There's no circus without the clowns, and I mean that as respectfully as possible in terms of the player, And so, I think they knew the value of getting, the names attached to that ship, depending on which side you were on. And listen, from an optics standpoint, like they couldn't have played it any worse, the WPA, and they had leverage throughout. You know what I mean? Like they had some moves they could have made, but the way that they moved publicly was just, you see that face palm emoji, Mike, on your phone. I don't know if you have.
Yeah, it's always the hand facing. It's like, did you really say that? Or did you really?
Yeah. Well, because I remember that show in particular with, I think it was the second time that we had Sean on, and we usually will have a couple of minutes of like, hey, how you doing? How are things? You know what I mean? Like in the green room, I guess, before we go live. But like, I had no idea what was coming that day. I had no idea what he was going to say. And had I, like, as much as I love, getting stuff like that on the page or whatever, it was like the human part of me was like, as he's saying it, I'm like, man, in my head, I'm thinking, I really wish that he would have told me, because I probably would have said, are you sure you want to do that? Because it came across, about as bad as it could. And then it was just a series.
Especially the part about acknowledging that they were trying to railroad the Hanoi tournament.
He was a lot more open about it than he was a lot more open about it, because we had heard those things, right? We're there talking with players and promoters in the background and hearing, oh, he's trying to do this and he's trying to do that, and we're like, and you're like, really, huh? Okay. And then, but when he says it on the record, it's a whole other ball game, And
it was like, we were in there really basically trying to submarine the thing. Okay.
Yeah, we're talking to city officials. We're writing letters. Like, is this guy really saying what I think he's saying right now?
So, at that point, it was, that was the first Hanoi tournament, and then the next phase of it was kind of trying to get back to the negotiating table, which, Hanoi kind of forced that to happen. And in retrospect, maybe the WPA should have taken that harder stance earlier, because they were supposed to early last year. And March 1st.
He said it. He said it, Mike. He said, "Listen, we were playing poker and we bluffed, and they called us on our bluff, and then you got caught with your hand in the cookie jar,
Yeah.
Which,
so then it came down to, but you know what that did was it gave them time to talk to the players and take a more measured, even-handed approach to explaining to players why the WPA can't do what Matchroom wants them to do, give them a blank check, let players play everybody and everywhere and not play in their tournaments and whatever the case is. They did a much better job of that at that point. And they got some players understanding that it's not as one-sided as it looks. It's both sides kind of, you know, holding their own ground and not letting anybody, get one over on them, so to speak. So,
Yeah, I think the hearing about the politicking going on behind the scenes was really interesting during all this time. And although like the public favor was more in terms of Matchroom, partly because of that popularity contest, partly because of what WPA had done publicly as well. The moves that they were making, like on a camera, but it was interesting to hear that as all these talks were happening, there was a lot more players like outside of the obvious, right? The Joshes and the Albans and
yeah,
guys like that who were really like, okay, they were not only listening to the WPA, but they were more in favor of that approach compared to what was happening on the other side,
right,
And I think that's when the shift started happening, like more of that pressure, because again, it all goes back to getting players at your events, right, Mike? I mean, everybody
right.
wants to get the best guys to produce the best content that's going to get the most eyes on there and all these things, especially for the amount of money they're putting up for these big tournaments.
So instead, what we had was a bunch of divided players, and I think that once there was division there, and players were like, I'm not risking my status with WPA, or the other one saying, I don't care about the WPA tournament, I'm playing all the match tournaments. It just split the players up, and that
Completely.
was not good for either side, which is what made it easier. When push finally came to shove, that's what made it easier for them to get back to the negotiating table.
Nobody was winning at that point, Mike, because everyone had a watered down
Yeah,
product. You
yeah.
know, like
It was
nobody.
looking like it was going to get worse in the coming year. There was going to be more. Forget the players. There was going to be more, um, you know, activity at the national level with federations stopping promoters from running events that weren't WPAs. It could have gotten really ugly really fast. And I think Matchroom realized that, and WPA didn't want to go down that road, but I think that they knew that was, that this is the way they run their business. So, that's when it finally started to get, okay, they first started talking in December of last year about coming to some kind of agreement, right? And it didn't happen until May or
Right.
April.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of back and forth, a lot of discussion, a lot of little nuanced things that kind of make things drag on. But what it showed me was how serious they both were about eventually getting something done, because the way it was after October wasn't sustainable for either one of them and was not good for the players.
And to Aishan's credit, I mean that he took that stance pretty consistently, as far as being open to having that discussion and communicating, whether or not like it was hammered, publicly or not. He was very much on that same path. And even times I think the last time I spoke with him, at least in person, was probably like Junior Nationals last year when the Joy Boys were in town, but like, you can see it on their faces, just how it was already enough. You know what I mean? Like the jockeying was already like they just wanted to figure out some way to get it done.
And like I said, thankfully they did, because if this iteration of negotiations had failed, I think that could have been like it until someone screamed uncle. It could have just been bad for a while going on without any hope of getting back in there, because they were tired of each other at that point. So it was really important that they get this thing done. So now, what exactly did they get done? You know,
Unbox it for me, Mike.
well, essentially what what Matchroom wanted was to be able to run their tournaments their way, invite what players they wanted to invite, have open spots for other players, and not have to
And just
answer.
leave me the fuck alone.
Yeah, we're running a professional tour here and a professional business. Let us just do our thing and run our business and kind of stay out of our way, which WPA can't do and still operate successfully. But what they were trying to do then was find a way to make that as close to even as they could. So, the biggest thing Matchroom wanted was, you got to pull the ban on all these players. All these players who are banned, they got to be able to play in WPA. They got to be able to play in WPA events, and WPA players have always been able to play in Matchroom events. Just what was it going to cost them?
When was the European, Mike?
What's
Refresh my
that?
memory. When was the European?
The European was in. Let me.
Mike's looking at the calendar there.
Yeah.
And the reason why I'm asking, Mike, is because if Hanoi was what, October?
Right.
You know what I mean? So it's like there wasn't nothing going on for those, at 5 months out of 6 at least. You know what I mean?
For the players, it was a pretty good little open stretch where there wasn't a lot at stake. But now with the calendar starting to open up in March, and Matchroom starting to come across with its dates for events, then it was go time for a lot of these players, decision making time, travel planning time, things like that. So to get back, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, I mean, depending on the player, like everyone had their own reasoning to go the route they took when they took it, and so whether it was, I'm enjoying more of the cakewalk on a less competitive side, or I can appreciate and I want to go after, getting a world championship, and them being optimistic in terms of where those events could go if they were going, on the upward trend, you know what I mean, in terms of payouts and things like that or whatever. Um, and then you have a guy like Shane. I saw him comment on your post, Mike, where he was like, finally I can get to play, in a world 10 ball. Like that means something to that guy at this point of his career, like playing.
Shane was one of the guys who, he was really, he's always been a Matchroom guy, and he was, touting the Matchroom, waving that flag in the early days. But
he didn't.
There were times toward the end of last year where he wasn't, he was waffling pretty on a daily basis of which way he was going to go this year. And there were a lot of players who were really weighing it out. It wasn't as slam dunk as a lot of people think.
No.
And obviously, Josh was going to stick with WPA events and his European status and all that kind of stuff. So, you had players like that. It was, there was a lot of uncertainty, which again kept people at the table to negotiate because it, just needed to get sorted out.
I don't think either one of those guys like being like the pawn used in that war, at any point throughout, and that's not neither of their like strong suits. You know what I mean? Like, but like Shane at least is aware that he's a big enough fish in that pond where like he knows, but that's just he's not that guy. You know what I mean? Like he doesn't, and more importantly, he doesn't want to be that guy. He does not want to be that guy in the face of like being, used in this regard or on that regard, or no matter which way that you're going. And I mean, obviously, like it couldn't have got any worse for Josh, but that was more of like the way that he went about things.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
that's Josh's own problem.
Yeah, more than anything. But it's like that's where, from the promoter side, needing the players to be there is vital, obviously, but then it's like from the individual players, depending on if you're a young European player, you're you have a whole different outlook compared to if you're in the twilight of Shane, where like, hey, I want to ride off into the sunset with one more US Open and a US Open 10 ball championship. That's what he wants, like that's how he wants to end the Shane career, which is very much like in his thought process at this point of his life.
Yeah, he's goal oriented. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So where are we today, Mike? There's it.
So
it
so the what they agreed to was that Matchroom wanted the bans lifted, and to do that, the WPA agreed to ratify all the Matchroom events, right? Which is short of sanctioning, which would start to put restrictions and requirements and whatever on it. So, and it's ratified as something that they actually didn't come up with just for Matchroom. They actually had come up with that for other promoters they had been working with in WPA events. I think Joey is probably in there someplace, since they're throwing out such big money. So, some of these promoters want a little more leeway with how they do things, the rules they play under, the way they invite people, things like that. Don't want to have to follow all the WPA rules. So there's still a fee associated with that. And I guarantee Matchroom paid a fee to the WPA, to get this ratification stamp on all their events.
when you say fee, are you meaning like cutting a check, or are you saying that like taking a hit publicly? Like I don't understand what you're.
no, cutting a check,
Okay.
cutting a check. And so, and in return, WPA wanted things. WPA for one, we all know that, we. I was at the World Championship last year in Saudi Arabia, and it was not a great place for the WPA to be. They were. They had no friends in the room, and they had two players, I believe, 2 or 3 players that Matchroom gave them as
Wojciech, am I close?
yeah,
Is Wojciech one of them?
Shevchuk was
Okay.
one of them. I think Daniel Maciel might have been a WPA pick.
Pretty sure you're right.
And so, but they only had a couple of them, and Matchroom, played their contract card and said, "This is all we really have to give you." And so, if the WPA was going to go forward, they need more spots in the World Championship. They need more allocation, right? Which I'm sure they got this year, which I'm sure they'll get going forward. And that's as much, that was a move that they had to make if they were to get their members to buy into agreeing to sanction, to give Matchroom a pass on these events. If they were to do that,
You mean in terms of like the board? Is that what you're saying?
yeah, I mean,
or the federations?
for the WPA board, like Ishan, to go to the EPBF and to go to the BCA and to go to the Asian Association and whatever, and get them to say, okay, we'll sign off on Matchroom Rundies. They weren't going to get that unless these guys, these members, got something for that, and being able to go to their continental federations, their national federations, and say we've got spots in the World Championship for our national championship winner and this winner and whatever. That's a big deal to them. That's what gives them their credibility with their players, and that's what usually helps get them their funding from their local governments, right?
Right.
So, that was one of the key things for the WPA. And so this year we just got the announcement on the World Pool Championship, right? And it's the 100 top WNT players. It's going to be a 128 player field, but the WPA is going to get, more allocation this year, and the Saudis will get some wild cards. So if there's 28 spots left, I would guess WPA is going to get 16. They'll get, 10 for Saudi Arabia, and Matchroom will still have 3 or 4 in their pocket for special, invitations. So that's kind of what I'm assuming.
How big of how big of a piece on both sides was the World Championship, Mike? Because I know, WPA is a little salty over losing that event the way that they did, and having that regret. And then, but like, how much leverage did they have with Matchroom in terms of that event? Because that was still very, very much.
That's the type of thing that, that was from each side. I think that was a lawsuit waiting to happen. Who was going to win a lawsuit on how much Matchroom owns that event and how much the WPA owns that event. So, Matchroom bought it. It looked like they were in the driver's seat. I'm sure there's, I wouldn't even want to get into the legal argument over, but I think WPA felt like if they got into a legal battle over the World Pool Championship, they would have had some leverage, and Matchroom thought they had leverage. So, it's the way both sides usually go. Luckily, it never got to that point. So, that was a big deal. And
Was getting this done prior to this World Championship that was just announced? Was that like we need to get this done
I
before
don't
July?
think that the World Championship was hanging into balance. I don't think the Saudis were threatening to not do the deal if a WPA Matchroom deal hadn't gone through. I think that they would have liked it to gone through. They want it to be as legit World Championship as it can be. But remember that this whole World Championship pool is just part of a package that Matchroom has with the Saudis that includes snooker, which is a bigger piece. So that whole deal wasn't going to get queered over an argument between the WPA and Matchroom for the 9-ball tournament. I don't think. That would have been really surprising to me. So,
and we heard the importance of it with that announcement this past week, Mike. She made mention of the fact that it was going to be 4 weeks of Q Sports out in Saudi, and mention the snooker and how much that's kind of like pulling the pool along and all these things. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't know what held up the announcement on that. Maybe they were trying to, because there's a couple pieces to the puzzle with snooker and pool. They're trying to get all that logistically worked out. I know the snooker last year was in Riyadh, and this year it's over in Jeddah in the same hall that the 9-ball was last year. So, I mean, who knows? There's a lot of logistical issues. The Saudis, who knows what kind of demands, what kind of requests they had in terms of time frames or months or locations or whatever. Who knows? But I don't think that the WPA Matchroom tussle had much to do with that.
Where do you feel like the faith of the players are at these days with either camp, Mike?
I think the players are just, happy now that they can just go play in whichever events they want to play in. So, the players are always, joyfully oblivious of the
interesting phrase to take, Mike.
Well, it just kind of, it's like, not like, okay, I can play anywhere, and they're just going to start sending in entry fees and sign up for stuff anyway. They don't pay attention to, they're not real detail oriented in reading the fine print on these events, and I don't expect them to be. All they want to do is go play pool. You got to turn.
They should. I get the previous generation and taking that approach, and for sure on the American side of things, because depending on where you're at in the world, there's more value in that agreement compared to if you're stateside, right? Because the Americans aren't getting any kind of support in terms of the BCA and things like that. So they could, they can have the option to go play wherever they want to go play, but they're not getting, an extra jelly one way or the other. You know what I mean? And a lot of them, especially how the course of the calendar played out, it really just put a highlight on these expenses. And that's a huge part of everything going on right now from the players. So
and really, if the WPA really wants to give itself, good standing with the players and the fans and everybody else, now that this is all sorted out, they will, and the game has become so global, and these other markets have become so huge, like Asia and Indonesia and Vietnam, is to find a way to work with promoters to get these events in the same parts of the world, same parts of the year, because that would have a huge impact on the expenses that these players play. We all know now what happens when you get one of these major events, whether it's certainly the Matchroom majors in different countries, and you would think the Predator World Championships in other countries, local and regional, other nations or local and regional promoters all like grab a big event and stick it on the front end, the back end of a tournament. So now you can start to create something that almost has a little bit of a tour look to it, where players, if they're going over to Asia and they can stay cheap, they can stay for a month and play in 3 big events. One major and a couple of bookend events, or 2 majors and a couple of bookend events, and there are 5 weeks. Who knows? But
saw that in Vietnam, Da Nang to Hanoi.
There's a lot of opportunity for that going forward. So, but it's going to take some, logistical finessing, and you don't expect the promoters to do that with each other. That's why the WPA at this point would be wise to try to help facilitate something like that. It's not easy to do.
To Matchroom's credit, they've got like that in and of itself, being able to get promoters on board to buy into that, being a World 9-Ball Tour event is pretty surprising, because everyone is so self-involved, and I'm only going to be concerned with number one and all these things, and it's not just in terms of the players, because the promoters are very much the same way, but they're also not dumb in the sense that they, like you mentioned, they want to piggyback this major event happening in my region, because there's already going to be a good amount of guys there. And if I can bring that volume of player, that caliber of player to my venue for my event, then it's worth, maybe putting in. I mean, ideally putting on events is tough in general, but maybe it makes it more worthwhile when they're putting in 10 or 20, depending on the added money.
Yeah, no, it's, and because there'll be multiple promoters wanting to take advantage of the Florida Open on the front end of it or back end of it, there's going to be some competition with them over who's going to put up enough money to draw the most talent, right? So that can only help. There's a lot of upside to this with all this stuff being out in the open and open for everybody now. There's ways to do this that will be advantageous to everyone. So
when you say like they ratified for Matchroom, like how much are these players who do get government support or federation support, like is now the US Open going to be an event that if I'm, an Austrian, am I getting help from my federation there, Mike? Or if I'm, a German, am I getting help going and playing in?
I don't know for sure, but I wouldn't think so, because it's not a WPA sanctioned event, and that's what they're going to hang their hat on. Now the World Championship's a different story. So these are ratified; they're not sanctioned, which means that the players. I mean, Jim mentioned something here about they still get to keep their ranking. Well, yeah, Matchroom's got their rankings, but WPA is also going to have its rankings, and they're going to be separate, right? And if you play in a WPA tournament, you win it. Here's something. Look at someone like Aloysius. Yeah, he didn't get a WPA point for winning the UK Open. He's rock solid with the WNT, but that not helping him get into the World 10-Ball Championship, because he still has 0 points in the WPA rankings, or something of that nature. So the ranking issue is that's an interesting part of it, in terms of, because it's not sanctioned, you're not getting WPA points for winning a Matchroom tournament. You will with the World Championship, because that's a WPA sanctioned event. So, but for these other Matchroom events, you're not getting any WPA points. So you'll have to play in WPA tournaments to get those points. If you want to get one of those, I mean, we know that the World 10-Ball, World 8-Ball, the Predator World Championships they're running with WPA, those are only like 64-man fields.
Yeah.
So it's going to be, it's not just sending your entry fee and you're in. That's a smaller club. So you're going to need those WPA points, to get those shots.
You mentioned Hanoi and the Asian players. You also mentioned Yap, and a lot of those guys were affected more than others during this whole process, Mike. Because of everyone trying to keep their ground on that market, and it became a pissing contest. How much, if any, is Hanoi or major events held in Asia? How much is that going to be an issue going forward?
Well, I mean, theoretically, and I think one of the things that kind of held this whole thing up from being finished earlier was when you start getting into those other areas of the world where you're going into someone else's, federation, area and talking to promoters there about running an event that's ratified but not sanctioned.
Right.
So, I think that they've worked it out to the point where that's not going to be an issue. You kind of touch base with the national federation, let them know you're coming in, make sure the promoter is on the up and up, is not someone in bad standing, things of that nature. That'll have some impact on it, but it shouldn't hold up any events from happening anywhere, which is great. And they may get, they might start getting cooperation from some of those national federations, even if it's not sanctioned. So the main thing is to make sure that players in those countries can play in a WNT event without concern about from their national federation. So if an event goes into Vietnam, I'm not worried about the top 100 being able to go over it, right? If you're Matchroom, it's the other 156.
Yep.
You're going to get a big portion out of the Vietnamese player base. Well, you want to make sure that those players are free to play without, threat from their own federation. I think that's pretty much been covered.
What about I'm trying. There's just a lot of different aspects to all this, and kind of
talk about what Jim said here about Matchroom doesn't care about that. They don't want 10-ball tournaments affecting their ranking. Nothing's going to affect nobody. I mean, Matchroom's rankings are going to be Matchroom rankings, but those only impact Matchroom events. So Matchroom doesn't want 10-ball events. Yeah, but I think some of those guys, Shane, whatever, they'd like to know that they can get into the World 10-ball Championship, the World 8-ball Championship, the World. They want WPA points. These guys. I mean, if they put some stock in being able to now play in all the WPA tournaments, like the WPA players can play in WNT tournaments, they want to be able to get into these bigger events, the bigger prize money events. So there is some importance there to them having WPA points as well.
Yeah, and I mean, look, as those world championship prize funds continue to increase, we've seen that over the last couple of years. It just becomes more. It's more of a premium for these guys, and if they can pick up, and
or China Open or Qatar Open,
I was about to.
Those are all WPA sanctioned events. So
I was going to ask about those in particular, Mike, because those are 9-ball events but those were WPA 9-ball events. Right. Is there anything that leads you to believe that those events will then be included in any kind of like WNT ranking type system? Because those are big money events, Mike, in their own right.
I don't know. I don't know what, if it's a WPA sanctioned event, the China Open, and it's a 9-ball event, could Matchroom reach out to them and say, do you want your event to include WNT points? I don't know what the objection would be to that, but I don't know how that would be handled.
Do you think that this will help grow, get an American pool like back in China, Mike, and considering the hold that Hayball has out there?
What do you mean?
Like we mentioned the China Open. Do we think we can start seeing more decent money added events, or more like now with this agreement with the WPA and Matchroom, and then having by default getting support from, I'm assuming, the Chinese Federation and things like that? Could we see some of these players who we haven't seen in some years come back and play these Matchroom events like Wu Jiajing or Lu Hai Tao or whatever? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think you could. I don't know. In each individual case, how many of them weren't playing because of threat, or how many of them weren't playing because they're just not playing. I don't know what the circumstance was for each of those guys. But yeah, I would imagine some of them, combination of not getting any support to go outside China to play, but also all the opportunities to play in China. So, yeah.
I hope so in terms of that, because it seems like it gets everybody more excited when we start seeing more international flavor be added to that pot, and even the Spanish Open that disappeared since the last time we saw it, that was a great event. The guy showed up. Who was it? Q-Tech guy that ended up winning that event. Dang won the event. I picked him, by the way, now that I think about it. But That was the first time we had seen Wu in forever. That was the first time we had seen Deng in forever. And you get this like certain level of talent that is in China that, you know, is untapped, that we haven't seen in some time. Or in the WPA's case, we get to see them now, what, once a year, maybe for the China Open, and then that's
Right.
it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, hopefully this will open it up a lot for, you know, just for starters, there's a lot more events, or maybe we're just hearing about it more, but a lot more events in Asia now, for that region, which is great. That's what they really needed to happen. So, you know, you would hope that you're going to see more of these guys pop up.
EPBF seems to be adding more money. WNT is adding more money to their events.
Yeah,
You know,
Predator's doing a great job with the Euro Tour, adding more money. I think the first year mostly to the infrastructure of the tour. I saw a release today where the top
getting their hotel, or top 8, I think it was.
I think it might be top 16 men and top 8 women, or top 8 men and top 4 women, top ranked, get, you know, their hotel and entry fee paid. It's nice little perk. It kind of, you know,
you get a free roll, Mike. That's a great.
You do get a free roll. It's like going to one of the Joy events.
Yeah. Well, that's huge for some of these guys, and goes a long way to the end of the year bottom line, you know, and especially like with one or two good showings, you know, you solidify your place in that standing, and now it alleviates that pressure that you would have otherwise if you're shouldering it, you know, or you know, I don't, again, each country is different in terms of their support and what they get going out there and participating in those events. But like not having it hang over your head that, man, you know, this is essentially a $1,800 match for me, where 1,800 goes a long way in this country versus somewhere else. You know what I mean? And so times that times whatever 8 events per year, whatever it is, you know what I mean? Like that's a big burden for some of these guys.
Yeah,
you know?
it is. No, that's great stuff that's going on there. So, you know, hopefully, you know, things start. You know, there's such promise out there right now. There's so many good events. You know, it's just nice that the field's been cleared out a little bit, and we'll see how everybody kind of moves ahead.
How important for this deal, Mike, was there any kind of discussion in terms of respecting the calendar and these big world championships that are happening that are outside of 9-ball?
Yeah, you know, that's always going to be an issue. I don't think that was really addressed directly in terms of any kind of, you know, decision making. You know, I think that they're just going to have to try the best they can. I mean, WPA even concedes at this point there's too many events, too many places in the world for people to start. I mean, you know, 4 or 5 years ago, when Matchroom would post an event, you'd get bitching and moaning from the EPBF that it's on top of a Euro Tour event in Austria, and you're like, who cares? But now the events are so, you know, even the huge events.
Well, Euro Tour in Austria, Albin wasn't even going to those back then, Mike. You know what I mean? Like,
so, but you know, but the big events now, there's so many of them. It's really going to be hard to do that, and we see, you know, the promoters, you know, they all blame each other for stepping on each other's events, and we were here first and all that. And the truth of the matter is, they both play the same game. They both start the year throwing out dates and imaginary events and locking up space on the calendar that 60% of the time either never happens or the dates get changed. You know, there was a big block in the WPA calendar for a to be determined event in May. It took up like 10 days, 13 days, something. I was told it was a Predator slot. Disappeared. You look at the end of the year in the WPA calendar now, there's 3 or 4, I think 4 big slots taken up with Predator events to be determined. One of them is the World 10-ball, which is going to happen. But the other 3, no clue. Now, maybe they'll happen. I hope they do. I mean, the more the merrier. But, you know, it's just kind of a games playing chess match that everybody has to do to kind of pin down their dates. And then still, you know, it's all the players are held hostage because it's May and they still don't know what the second half of the year looks like
Well, is anyone going to be staring down the barrel of that gun with this, ratification versus sanctioning? Like if there is some conflicting events, are players going to feel pressure or that like behind the curtains kind of
Yeah, there
threat, like,
will be.
hey,
Yeah,
you
there'll
better go
definitely be.
here?
Yeah, there'll definitely be pressure from their federation if there's a major WPA event, sanctioned event on the same dates as a WNT major. Then I think it will be up to continental federations to make their own decisions. It won't be a U.S. A WPA mandate. I think it'll be up to the continental federation to determine how they're going to handle who plays where, or what happens if you play in the Matchroom event instead of the World 10 Ball event if there was something at the same time. So that's why it's important to kind of avoid those if possible. And that's all about, getting calendars set before a year starts. I mean, that's most sports do it.
Yeah, but listen, we're 5 months into the calendar now, and we've been dealing with this on the 9 ball side of things, where they're just announcing 2 months out in the World Championship, or
And the 10 ball thing. They've got
yeah.
all these, open, all these locked up spots on the WPA calendar that have no event attached to them. So it's all just, rolling the dice and hope something happens. So, but can a player look at the WPA calendar now for the third and fourth quarter this year and make their travel plans? No. All you know is these dates are locked up, but they don't know what the event is or what part of the world it's in. So how are they going to make travel plans?
How long is this peace treaty in place for, Mike?
It's like a couple of years, but from what I hear, there's a couple of years, but there's a couple of, out clauses and whatever. But yeah, hopefully it's just, hopefully it just kind of just moves on from here.
Is it just kind of like putting a Band-Aid on? No,
I think this is better. I mean, this whole ratification thing and not worried about sanction fees and sanctions and penalties. That opens the door about as wide as you could have hoped. So now you just have to figure a way to play nice.
We saw the announcement on the WPA page, with a big Matchroom logo on there. But it was last year, I think, Mike, in March, where we had a WPA announcement, and Matchroom comes out and says, "Well, hold on a minute, we didn't necessarily, agree to that." This I would say lack of acknowledgement publicly from Matchroom, does that leave you for any kind of like cause for concern in regards to this agreement?
No, I don't think. I mean, the press release that WPA put out was a joint press release. It was a press release signed off by both and had quotes from Emily in there and all that kind of stuff. So it was a joint release.
So it was on the up and up, is what we're saying, Mike.
On the square, but Matchroom didn't make a big deal out of it. I think that was for several reasons. One, it was came out right in the middle of right at the front end of the UK Open. Right.
What time of the day was it here in the States, Mike?
It was like 2:00 in the morning.
Didn't I call it? I was at least within 15 minutes of it, at least.
But yeah, they kind of dropped that one in the middle of the night. So UK Open was going on. They didn't want to, take anything away from the event that they were just working on, which I don't blame them. They were getting ready to roll out Moscone Cup tickets, things like that. You try not to step on your own feet while you're trying to run down the street. So I think that was part of it. And I think part of it, too, was a little gamesmanship in, I don't think Matchroom wanted to make it seem like such a big deal. I think they wanted to make it look like, well, I'm glad, we're glad this happened and we're glad we worked this out, but we've been all planning on just charging ahead with our business no matter what, which is the song they've been singing the whole way along anyway. So I don't think they wanted to make it seem any bigger than it needed to be. So I think that played a part in it too.
Are we done with the pissing contest, Mike, already?
For the time being, I mean, here's part of the thing is, you have to remember WPA is not just pool. I mean, it also includes hay ball, and he's the wheelchair sport, things like that. They've got a lot of other irons in the fire, right? Particularly hay ball. So I think and that's why this could have gone south, and they would have been like, okay, get back to us in a couple of years. We've got plenty to keep us busy. They're coming out with a pretty good, robust calendar of events, and then with the hay ball in there, they barely have time for pool. That's why I think that this will go smoothly for the most part going forward, because they've got a lot on their plate with Joy these days. And so now that they've got this pool thing kind of, they're not having to worry about banned players and who they can have to keep an eye on, who they're banning next month. They don't have to worry about this stuff. They can go on and go to China and sit in the front row for, 21 days of hay ball.
Look, for 680,000, I'll go sit on for 21 days of hay ball, Mike, for sure. I look, we see a guy like Oliver, Chris Melling, Kelly Fisher do well, and those are like American 9-ball pool staples, right? Or depending, but like I'd be really excited to see what that trickle down effect is like if some of these 9-ball players would then, if they would have an even bigger influx of players go out there and give a swing for these big money events in terms of hay ball, Mike.
Yeah, it depends on how active the 9-ball calendar is. If they've got enough on their plate for the year, you're not going to sniff any part of that 680,000 if you're not playing hay ball 8 hours a day every day for the next year. So, you're not just going in and taking a free swing. Someone like Kelly Fisher, she's still in the winner's side in the final 16 or final 8. It's amazing. She beat Chris Melling. And, so.
Yeah, did you see post about that spot though?
Well, yeah, I mean, the spot's ridiculous for players at that caliber, for a woman to get a ball, the last ball, not the first ball. They used to be the first ball. The last ball.
Huge.
That's enormous. So, that makes a big difference. But either way, she's still playing great.
She is.
But yeah, I don't know. You're not going to see. I'm surprised to see Oliver Solnacki still in there swinging, because I don't think he spends a lot of time playing hay ball, but he looks like he's ready.
Well, let me tell you, I seen Oliver play some 8-ball before. Okay, kid's a great player, unbelievable talent, but brutal with no shot clock. I mean, just tough. But like, if I were some of these guys who only get to play 8-ball, but a couple times a year, seeing a guy like Oliver do well, and he's a great player. He'll go deep in any 8-ball tournament that he's in. But like, if I'm one of these Americans, like if I'm a guy like Shane, seeing Oliver do well, I'm like, you know what? I might go and put on the vest and bow tie and go.
Yeah,
give it a
I guess, but you see these other guys, guy like Chris Melling, that's his game.
Yeah.
Garrett Potts, guys like that, that's their game, and they're still.
No, they're specialists, and even the name players that we know. Look, there's
they haven't been in the top 2 in the Grandmasters either, and that's where the big money's at, because it drops like a brick from there. So, the nice thing is you're free rolling, because they pay your expenses, your flight out there, your hotel, your meals, all that kind of stuff. And if you finish 17th, you got $6,500. So that's 3 weeks in China for $6,500. I don't know how that swings with you, but that would be a long trip for me.
Oh, I don't know. I like some Chinese food, Mike. I don't know. I might be all right. Although 2 weeks might be pushing it.
Well, they're there for 2. I mean, they're there for 2 weeks if you're getting anywhere near the final, stage 3.
Do you think that this will, like, obviously the main guys are going to continue to play in WNT events, right? Like Josh is going to continue to play because he's got a realistic chance. But there's other guys that are like middle of the pack guys who, like, whether this was going to happen or not, it's been trying on that bank account to keep this going. Some Europeans with some real come to Jesus moments with themselves, and I heard it as much when I was talking with guys in Da Nang last year, Mike, right before the Hanoi Open.
Right.
There was plenty of guys who I had real candid off the record conversations with, where they were like, it's too much. You
Yeah,
know?
no, it is. It is. It's gotten really, really expensive for these guys to try to keep up with it. Um, so yeah, no, but you can't have 1,000 players all of a sudden decide they're going to play joy events because they pay their expensive.
There's some nitty pool players, Mike. If you tell them you're paying their expenses, and they're look,
But
Corey
at
Deuel went to China, Mike.
what
If I
point
don't
are
tell
they
you,
going to continue to do that?
Corey,
Are they going to do that for 500 players? Or are they going to do that for
I
1,000
don't know.
players?
I don't know.
There's got to be an invitation list and a cutoff of who's going to get that free roll. So
Corey
uh,
will be in California, and he won't even go play like the California State Championship. You know what I mean? So like, there's a reason why he traveled all the way.
Corey's on that list. I mean, he plays enough
Yeah.
that he's done well enough to have a little bit of a reputation as an American, Chinese 8-ball player. But beyond that, you're not getting number 60 of the American players to go, getting his expenses paid to go to 5 or 6 joy events in Asia every year. I don't see that happening.
I think we need to find out more about this Hayball situation because I think they get a pretty good amount of players with all their expenses taken care of, Mike, to go out there and play. And I don't mean just travel; I mean like hotel and
Yeah, I'd like to find out more about every event because they have a lot of these satellite events, and they're not, they're not 650,000 first place. So, I don't know. I'm just curious. Yeah, I'm curious too to see how deep how deep those packets are.
All right, Mike. Well, I think that about unboxes everything in terms of this WPA Matchroom agreement, or what are we missing here?
For now.
For now?
Yeah, no, it's it's good for the players. It's good for everybody. It's good for the promoters. So we'll see whether people take advantage of it or someone gets greedy and decides to clear the whole thing up.
All right, Mike. Well, I got to run because my daughters are home and the door's locked. So I can hear them banging on the door.
Take a nap. And, go answer for about an hour.
I got to take off. Thanks everybody for hanging out. We'll see you.